Welcome back, everyone. Last time we spoke about the cash flow quadrant with Robert Kiyosaki. I'll bring it up here in a second. And we talked first and foremost, kind of getting guided tour of the pros and cons of the different quadrants. And I think we tend to put these in a hierarchy because we're just in a hustle and grind culture. Today, we're going to be talking about the S quadrant. Please go back to the previous show and check out our conversation about pros and cons and our own experiences with the E quadrant. Did you learn anything about me you didn't know from the E
Yeah,
quadrant? I learned that you worked in a grocery. I didn't know that.
you've talked about Starbucks, but I didn't realize that you worked there long enough to get, about 30 going on your 401k or whatever the matching program
Yeah.
was there. So that's a significant amount of time at Starbucks, which is super cool. I didn't know that you use that to then springboard to the DR with your wife. I think that's really
Yeah.
cool. So that's what I
Yeah.
learned. But
Yeah.
go back, everyone. The link is below to the main episode where we talk about the cash flow quadrant and then
Yeah.
to the employee episode. On this episode, we're going to start with self-employed. So,
Yeah.
Grant, you
hmm
are, and this is where the self-employed and the business one gets kind of funky. So, do you want to talk about how you describe yourself?
Yeah. So quickly, how the S quadrant relates to where I'm at today. And my financial freedom journey is also like a meaning journey. So I'm not dogmatic about, like you're saying, it's pretty fluid. Some days I'm a pure business owner and I have employees. And if you read this chart, please do. Employees are producing the money that I benefit from. But in self-employment, you're still wearing a lot of hats. You're in the business and you might juggle, hey, today I'm a business owner, tomorrow I'm self-employed. For example, we're going through something right now where I'm in the weeds. Now, fortunately, I know how to be a good employee. I know how to punch a clock for myself. Fortunately, I know how to grind and I know the craft that we're doing very well. So I do spend, I'll range you. I spend between 40 to 60% of my time still in the self-employment quadrant. And it gets kind of weird because we might talk about real estate once we get to the I quadrant, but there's a lot of days that the I quadrant and real estate, it's actually not necessarily the I quadrant. There's these fluid boundaries in the SBI quadrant depending on how things are going and how hands-on or hands-off you are. So that's the S quadrant for me, but I consider myself at this point generally unemployable because of paradigms, not because of skill. But that's how S quadrant relates to me. How does S quadrant relate to what your journey right now?
Yeah, and I was very open about this in the E quadrant conversation, but I'm an employee first and foremost. And
Um,
on my nights and weekends, I am self employed. I do have a company where I support people to build websites and build other digital products. I'm currently building right now kind of like a member specific area for a company as they start to build out digital products. And they basically just
mm,
want to have that, behind a paywall. And it's really
yeah.
exciting because it's going to allow them to be able to have, and once again, we use this word very, very loosely here, but passive income. What it's going
Yeah.
to allow them to do is to build once, sell twice. Once they have the digital product, they're going to be able to have it up on their website and then be able to push people towards it. So I'm currently building that right now for a company. So, but I liked how you broke it down somewhere between 40 to 60% of your time. And for
Mhm,
me right now, self-employment's probably 5 to 10% of my
mhm.
working time. But
Sure.
like I have my full 40-hour job. And then on the outside of that, on the nights, the weekends, and I've even been getting up in the morning early
Yeah.
just because if it's really incredible if you put in 30 minutes of work into something in the morning and 30 minutes at night, it breaks it up. And at
Yeah.
the end of the week, you've done 5 hours. You do an hour or two on Saturday, an hour or two on Sunday. You can really start to get some stuff done, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to building certain things. If you're really confident with it, you can really cut your time down and find a flow. But I
Mhm.
want to also call out to everyone watching that I am open about being in the E, S, and the I quadrant, and
Correct.
Grant is in the S, B, and I quadrant. So Grant is not an
Correct.
employee, and I'm not a business owner. And I
Mhm.
thought it was really interesting how you talked about how, depending upon the context and the
Yeah.
circumstance, you
Yeah.
can be in, like, if you just look at your real estate portfolio, some days you're an investor,
Yeah.
other days you're a business owner, and then on some days you can be self employed
Yeah.
on some level. And
Yeah.
so, why don't we look at the self-employed and talk about the best way to leverage being self-employed? Because I do think this is where we get into taxes. Taxes, you can figure that out. It's harder to leverage taxes, especially in the
Yeah.
US if you're just an employee. But once
Yeah.
you step into the S, B, or I, then you get into a conversation where you can probably increase the amount of money you're going to take home by leveraging the tax system.
Yeah. Well, okay, so real quick on on the S quadrant, and I wanna make sure I give you the meat first. Though employees, if you look at this chart, though employees, you trade time for dollars. What's different about self-employment? It is also time for dollars. The major difference is you are incentivized as a self-employed to learn more efficient ways to do it. You are trading time for dollars, but when someone pays you, they very rarely pay you because you show them a time clock and said, "I spent 15 hours on this." You generally spend time on it, make a quote, and say, "Here's a deliverable." And though you still are doing the work, you are employed, but you are self-employed. You have now incentivizations to go, "What shortcuts do I need?" The best example is when ChatGPT came out, we found a way to use ChatGPT to create 100 quotes and then import those quotes into a Canva bulk, and it creates infographics for people's content strategy. Well, we stumbled into ChatGPT, or it was invented, and then we toyed with it and learned it. Well, we're still charging the same $150 for that packet of quote graphics for our clients, but it's taking us 15 minutes now instead of 50 minutes. And so you're getting paid the same, but your time is condensed. So the difference, the major difference between self that you really need to hear about for your financial freedom starts with that. But then you look at other dials like you're talking about with taxes, and the best, simplest way I can say this is this. As an employee, you lend your taxes to the government and make the argument for why they should give it back to you at the end of the year. As a self-employed, you keep the taxes, and for the sake of time, maybe we'll do another episode on deductions because the riches of how to really create a spread over a 15, 20-year period is in taxes. But the difference between a self-employed and employed is with a self-employed, you keep that tax money, and then the IRS has to make a case on what you need to give them, and you make a case on what you get to keep. The idea being there are major benefits for you to have that money, look at that money, see what taxes you might pay, and then either reinvest that or put it to your own benefit. So you become in control of, depending on what state you're in the union. If you're in the US, I don't know where you're at, but in the US, depending on what state you're in, you could easily be sitting on an additional 28 to 31% that you've been holding on to. But what about you? What pros and cons have you experienced with self-employment?
Yeah, I think the taxes is definitely one. I'm able to write stuff off and I'm able
A
to
lot of
take
stuff.
lower my tax exposure at the end of the year, which is a really, really great thing. I'm able to write things off that I would normally do anyways. And I could just say, well, I needed to do those in the duty of getting this product or service out essentially to a client, which is really, really cool. So, but I do wanna leave that. So we will have a whole
Sure.
nother episode where we do talk about how to, take advantage of of taxes. And then the other thing that I think you hit on is the reason why I love it so much. As an employee, I'm supposed to work 40 hours a week,
Yeah.
right? Now, if I give the organization 100 hours of output, I still only
Mhm.
get paid 40 hours.
Yes.
But when I give a client 100 hours, I'm gonna get paid for those 100 hours.
Yeah.
And this is also where we're gonna have a different episode, so we don't get into this, but this is where you get into value-based pricing. And as a
Yes.
self-employed person, I can sell and I'm just gonna pick something up. So here we go. Here's a cable that is actually super useful. It's a USB to USB-C, and I use it all the time because I have an Apple. Now, this to if you buy it in the store is $10, maybe 10, 12 bucks. But if I find myself in a coffee shop with someone who absolutely needs this to connect
That's
their
right.
computer because they're going on with their CEO, and if they don't do this presentation, they're going to be fired,
Yeah.
I could sell this to this person for $100, right? And so once you get into being a self-employed person, you start to see that different solutions fixed for different people have different prices.
Yeah.
And so you can really start to leverage your time. So let's look at this again. And this is just a super simple, kind of stupid example. This is the product I have. This maybe takes me, if I'm an employee, well, I don't want to compare it to being an employee, but if I want to sell this for $10,
Yeah.
I can get to a point where I can produce this, like you said with the ChatGPT example, for a dollar because
Yes.
I'm gonna sell at scale. It
Yeah.
allows you get into economies of scale, and we will get
Yeah.
into economies of scale in another episode, but economies of
Sure.
scale is a fun it for me is a fancy way of just saying you can build almost exponentially.
Yeah.
As an employee, when you trade and you look at the quadrant, your time for money,
Yeah.
you are gonna be limited on some level.
Yeah.
Even the highest, if you work as a surgeon or a heart surgeon, you can max make $1 million in the US. That's how that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
If you are self-employed though, you can your time is becomes leveraged, and that is a different thing. When you're sitting
Yeah.
at your job and you have to be there for 8 hours, but you've already done your work and you have 6 more hours, well, if you're self-employed, you get those 6 hours back, right? Because what you actually needed to get done, you could get done in 2 hours. So, I could probably go on a larger diatribe here, and I think we will have a different episode about value, cost, and price.
Sure.
But when you're self-employed, then you get into the game of actually buying time back, which
Yeah.
is an exciting thing.
And you reach a really interesting, or you bring up a really interesting point, and that is this: an employee trades time for dollars, and the employer tells them where to be and when. As a self-employed, you are trading time for dollars, but depending how efficient you are, you can get that dollar per hour much more leverage, like you're saying. But the other advantage is you can move that around. Meaning you have the freedom to say, "Well, I'm gonna get up at 5 AM and just start working." And I think Alex Hormozy is big on this. He starts working at 5 AM. He's uninterrupted. He does the work he needs to do, and then by 1 or 2 PM, he's done. He goes to the gym or whatever he wants to do. You can decide when you execute those hours. So in the ESBI quadrant, for me, I have a financial freedom framework, and it starts with time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom. And time freedom, I used to have it the other way around, where it was location freedom first, then time freedom, and then financial freedom. But I've kind of modified that a little bit because pragmatically for people, they're not going to just wake up one day and become a business owner. If you make the leap from the E to B quadrant, which we'll talk about for another episode, there's some nuances there where you can't just be where you want when you want. It doesn't really work that way. It actually makes more sense to follow this journey of the employed to the self employed, because then you can say, well, I know what work I need to do, but let me juggle it around on my calendar so I can spend more time with my kids. A little that's a type of wealth. Or I spend more time with my spouse, or maybe I'll work later in the evening and work out in the morning. You not only can leverage or get more efficient and get rewarded for that efficiency, you can also start maximizing your calendar. One gets you more cash in your pocket for less time. The other gets you a greater sense of control, which is the number one thing I'm looking for in my life is, do I control my time? The only currency the wealthy really is limited to the wealthy too. So I don't know if that helps at all, but that I think that's a third point that we really have to call out. You control the clock, generally speaking.
Yeah, so we've done self-employed. Let's go ahead and we will see everyone in the next episode, which is going to be the B quadrant for the business owners, which is where you start to step into a different realm. The E and the S, as you see on the quadrant, you're still doing time for money. But when you get into the B and the I, then you start to leverage things that aren't time to get money. And this is where you do kind of see a more exponential growth if we're just looking at ROI or return on investment. So why don't we see everyone in the next one? And if you're interested in the cash flow quadrant, our main video, or the employee video, go ahead and check the links below. And we will see you in the next video. Thanks.
See ya.